This video is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc. If you're looking for cards in the US, look no further as you can use the promo code MTGMudsta to get you 5% off anything on the site. Or if you're in Canada like me, you can use the same promo code at Multizone to get 10% off your orders of singles. If cards aren't what you're looking for, Original Magic Art has playmats, tokens, and sweet art that you can use that same promo code to help you get 5% off your order there. And if you just want to help out the channel, you can always consider becoming a patron for as little as $1 a month and join the generic Goblin Gang. Hey gang, and welcome back. You're probably wondering what I'm doing sitting on a table in my studio space, and that's because today's video has a studio update. That, and we also have a brand new sponsor who gave me this sweet t-shirt, and that's Into the AM, and you'll hear more about them as we go. So throughout the entirety of building my studio space, I've been wearing the Into the AM graphic tees and basic tees, and they're actually super comfortable. They've also got some sweet deals going on, which is that you can get 3 graphic tees for $60 or 3 basic tees for $45. Plus, if you click on my link in the description below, you'll get an additional 10% off on these super comfy shirts. Sponsorships like these are what allow me to continue building this studio space, so by supporting them, you're supporting me. As you can see so far, I've had some pretty decent luck securing some box lights from my neighbor when they were moving away. I was also able to get a hold of the table that I first recorded Magic games on, thanks to Matt getting rid of it. It's wonderfully big and suits the space pretty well. Some of the new things that I've been able to purchase thanks to Into the AM sponsorships and the like have been these 2 cameras, a Sony a5000 and a Sony ZV-1. Both of these are going to be used as face cams or top-down cams, and I'm really excited to test them out. I'm pretty happy with the progress that I've made along the way, and thanks to some friends I've been able to do some big leaps, although the next big hurdle that I'm going to have to go over is audio stuff, and that's terrifying, but kind of exciting at the same time. But that's enough about the studio for now. I'm hoping to do some more updates in the future, along with some more sponsorships to help make those happen. So let's get into today's game. So just a bit of context for today's video. But a while back, I tweeted out a picture of Sander's Dragon Collection in EDH. A lot of people really loved it, so I thought it might be fun to do a game with just Dragon Commanders and see how that goes. We have the Dragon Master, Sander, playing Kairi, Keeping Cyllene Vision, Jwari Disruption, Moonring Island, Solemn Simulacrum, Talaran Sky Summoner, and a Shark Typhoon. I am playing fan favorite Ramos, keeping Simic Ascendancy, Overgrown Tomb, Farseek, Quandrix Command, Domri Anarchabolus, Sacred Foundry, and Animar Soul of Elements. Matthew is back playing Vivictus Asmati the Dyer, keeping Swiftfoot Boots, Skullclamp, Wood Elves, Ignoble Hierarch, Arcane Signet, Forest, and Swamp. His husband Brandon is playing Shadrix, keeping a Bojuka Bog, a Plains, Shattered Sanctum, Commander's Sphere, Remorseful Cleric, Secret Rendezvous, and Torment of Hailfire. Sander wins the die roll and starts us off. He draws, plays an island, and casts a Wayfarer's Bauble. I draw and play a tapped Overgrown Tomb. Matthew draws and plays a forest, casting Ignoble Hierarch and passing. Brandon just plays a swamp. Sander draws and plays Jwari Disruption as the land half and passes to me. I play an island for turn and cast Farseek, going to find a shockland. Matthew draws and plays a swamp. He casts Wood Elves, going to find a forest card, and passes while searching. Brandon draws, plays a Plains, and passes turn. Sander draws and plays Hall of the Storm Giants, which comes in tapped, and then pays 2 to crack the bauble and passes to me. I draw and play Sacred Foundry untapped, shocking myself and taking 2, and this helps me cast Animar. After that, I pass turn. Matthew draws and plays a Haunted Ridge. He casts an Arcane Signet, and then a Commander Sphere, and moves to combat. He swings the Wood Elves, which gets an Exalted trigger, and Sander takes 2, and Matthew passes. Brandon draws and plays a Shattered Sanctum. He then pays 3 for his own Commander Sphere, and passes. Sander plays a tapped Moonring Island, and casts Solemn Simulacrum. It comes in, and he goes to find a land, and passes to me. I draw, and play a Blood Crypt which comes in tapped, and then cast Domri Anarchabolus. I uptick him to make some mana, and pass turn. Matthew draws, and plays a Skullclamp. he casts Miri's Guile and Skull Clamps the Wood Elves to draw 2 cards. He follows up with some protection, casting Swiftfoot Boots, and passes turn. Brandon draws, plays a Plains, and casts Windborne Muse. Sander plays a Scavenger Grounds, and then pays 3 for a Crystal Shard. I draw, uptick Domri for a green, and use it to cast a Simic Ascendancy and pass turn. Matthew reorders his top 3 thanks to the Miri's Guile, and draws. He plays a Swamp, and has enough mana to cast Vivictus as Mahdi, and then moves to equip the boots onto it. I respond by casting Quandrix Command to bounce Vivictus and put 2 +1/+1 counters onto Animar, and thus add 2 counters to the Simic Ascendancy. With nothing else, he passes turn. Brandon plays a Bojuka Bog and exiles my graveyard. He then casts a Secret Rendezvous so that he and Sander can both draw 3 cards. He then follows up with Remorseful Cleric and passes. On his end step, Sander attempts to bounce my Animar with the Crystal Shard, but I pay the 1 to stop it. Sander draws and plays an island. He uses Crystal Shard on Animar again, and this time I don't have the mana, and it bounces back to hand. He then casts a Shark Typhoon, and moving to combat, swings the Solemn at Domri and passes to me. My turn is quite quick as I draw, uptick Domri to recast Animar, and pass turn. Matthew reorders his top 3 and then draws. He plays a Bloodstained Mire, and moves to recast Vivictus, and once it's out, moves to equip the boots. Sander responds with Pongify, which kills it while he makes a shark token as well. After that, Matthew cracks his Bloodstained Mire and passes turn. Brandon draws and plays a Vault of Champions. He then deepens his relationship with Sander from a rendezvous to a full-out wedding by casting a Wedding Ring. Sander makes a Wedding Ring token copy, and I'm suddenly the only one at the table without a husband. Brandon then casts Nikra, Lair Scavenger, and passes to Sander. Sander draws, and Brandon draws as well. Sander then plays an island, and casts Talrand before moving to combat. He swings a Shark token and Solemn at Domri, and I go to Flash Mutate a Sea Dasher Octopus onto Animar. This gives Animar a +1/+1 counter and the Ascendancy 1 as well, and it becomes a 3/3, and I block the Solemn. Sander decides to save the Solemn with a Crystal Shard, and then recasts it in his post-combat main phase and passes turn. I draw and play a Hollowed Fountain, shocking myself for 2 so it comes in untapped. I swing the Animar Octopus at Sander, who chumps with the Solemn and draws a card. I then uptick Domri in my post-combat main phase, casting Ramos and putting a counter onto the Animar pile and also the Simic Ascendancy. Matthew once more looks at his top 3, rearranges them, and draws. He casts Shouldered and moves to equip the boots this time. It's successful, and after that he passes. Brandon sacrifices the Remorseful Cleric to Shouldered and draws, and Sander draws a card with him. Brandon then plays an Idyllic Grange, putting a +1/+1 counter onto his Muse. He then casts Martyr's Bond and passes. Sander sacrifices the Baby Shark to Shouldered and draws, with Brandon drawing as well. He plays a Reliquary Tower and casts Thirst for Discovery, drawing 3 and discarding 2. This has Brandon drawing 3 cards from the Wedding Ring as well, and Sander follows up with Jace's Sanctum. This has Sander getting 2 sharks from his spells, as well as a Drake from the Thirst thanks to Talrand. He follows up with a Midnight Clock, making another shark, and passing to me. On my upkeep, I sacrifice Ramos to Shoulder's Trigger and draw. I play a Stomping Ground untapped and take 2, and cast an Izzet Charm to draw 2 and discard 2. I follow up by upticking Domri, and then casting Vivian, Champion of the Wilds. I downtick her looking at my top 3 and exiling a card and passing turn. On Matthew's upkeep, he reanimates the Wood Elves, and it comes in and grabs him a forest, and he then reorders his top 3 and draws. He equips the Skull Clamp to the Wood Elves, drawing 2 as it dies, and then clamps the Ignoble Hierarch and draws 2 more as well. Matthew then plays a land for turn, and moves to cast Gisa, Glorious Resurrector. He equips the Clamp to the Beast, and then casts Toxic Deluge where X is 4. Sander responds to this, using his Shard to save Talrand. Brandon then loses the life and draws a card from Nikra, and Matthew exiles all of our dying creatures to Gisa's ability, which negates the Martyr's Bond from triggering. Moving to combat, Matthew swings his smaller Sheoldred at Brandon for 2 and passes. Brandon draws, as does Sander. He plays a Plains and casts an Arcane Signet. He then sacrifices the Commander Sphere to draw a card, which Sander draws from as well, and everyone has to sacrifice an artifact from Martyr's Bond's trigger. Brandon then casts an Orzhov Advocist, and then Mangara the Diplomat, and passes turn. Sander and consequently Brandon draw a card for turn. Sander then plays Seagate Restoration, drawing 6, and Brandon draws as well. Sander also gets to scry off the Jace's Sanctum, and makes a 7/7 Shark token from Shark Typhoon. He plays an island, and casts Kyrie, which draws Brandon a card off Mangara, and once he's done, passes to me. I draw, uptick Domri, and then uptick Vivian, and pass. Matthew reanimates Gisa, and reorders his top 3 from Miri's Guile, and then draws for turn. He plays a Forest, and casts Garruk's Uprising, which draws him a card as it enters. Matthew then plays a Grave Pack, and follows up with an Awakening Zone, and goes to combat. He swings Sheoldred at Brandon for 6, and Brandon responds by pathing Gisa. Matthew then goes to grab a basic, and passes turn. Brandon sacrifices the Orzhov Advocist to Sheoldred, which creates a chain reaction with Matthew's Grave Pack to basically wipe the board. With his commander dying, Sander gets to mill some cards and returns to hand Seagate Restoration and Faded Infatuation. Brandon then draws for turn, making Sander draw a card as well. He casts Shandrix, and once he's out, casts Lightning Greaves and equips it onto his commander. He moves to combat, and Shandrix triggers, with Brandon giving himself an Inkling, while Sander gets to draw a card and lose a life. Brandon then swings Shandrix at me, and I take the 4. After that, he casts an Orzhov Signet, and moves to discard down to hand size. Sander draws, and Brandon draws as well. Sander then replays Talrand, and then casts Seagate Restoration, which he'd returned to his hand after his commander died, which draws Brandon some cards as well. Sander then makes a 7/7 Shark and a Drake token, and passes to me. I draw, and play a Lumbering Falls. I downtick Vivian to once more look at my top 3, and exile one of them, and uptick Domri, and pass turn. Matthew makes an Eldrazi Spawn, and reorders his top 3 before drawing. He plays a Swamp, and clamps the Spawn, triggering Grave Pact, and then Martyr's Bond, making everyone sacrifice 2 creatures basically. Matthew then goes to cast a Chaos Warp on the Martyr's Bond to stop the silly loose, and Brandon shuffles it in, and flips into a Witch's Cottage. Matthew then follows up with Beledros, and once Sander gets priority, counters the spell with a counterspell. After that, Matthew passes. Brandon draws, and Sander draws with him. He casts a Smothering Tithe, and then a Feldar Retreat, and goes to combat. Once more he makes an Inkling with Shandrix, and has Sander draw 1 and lose 1 life, which makes Brandon a treasure when he doesn't pay for the tax. He swings Shaddy at me for another 4, and then in his post-combat main phase, plays a Marsh Flats, cracking it and losing 1, and using the trigger from the Feldar Retreat to pump his board with a +1/+1 counter. At his end step, Sander attempts to bounce Brandon's Inkling, but he pays the 1 for it to deny the Crystal Shard. Sander draws, and Brandon draws as well, and Brandon also gets a treasure token. Sander then plays a Mystic Sanctuary, putting Windfall on top of his library, and follows up the Metallurgic Summonings. He plays up Propaganda, as well as a Sky Diamond, and then a Strategic Planning to grab the Windfall. Sander then follows up with Chart a Course, drawing 2, which has Brandon drawing 2, and making 2 treasure tokens. Sander then puts to stack a Windfall where the highest hand is 23, which will force Brandon to draw 46 cards. With only 43 cards left in his library, he responds by casting Generous Gift on Sander's Wedding Ring, and I respond by countering it with Dovin's Veto. Not wanting to die in an Orzhov deck to drawing out, Brandon then casts Teferi's Protection to phase out his Wedding Ring, so he'll only draw 23. In response, I cast Boros Charm, dealing 4 to Sander before it gets discarded, and the Windfall then resolves. After that, Sander swings some Sharks at Vivian and Domri, and Vivian dies, and Domri goes to 5. With all that craziness done, Sander passes to me. Despite having drawn 23 cards, I just draw and play a command tower. I uptick Domri and recast Ramos, and then discard down to hand size. Matthew makes an Eldrazi spawn and reorganizes his top 3. He plays a Smoldering Marsh and puts to stack a Culling Ritual. Sander responds by countering it with a Pact of Negation, and Matthew follows up with a Jeskai Will, choosing Sander to make 22 red mana. He uses 4 of that red for sneak attack, and then casts a Gaze of Granite where X is 0 to wipe away the Drakes and the Shark tokens. Matthew then follows up with a Doomed Necromancer using the sneak attack to put it out, and then activates it to sacrifice it. Everyone sacrifices a creature from Grave Pact and puts out Beledros. And Matthew floats his mana from his last land and then pays 10 life to untap all of his lands. He then sneak attacks in Hua Tao and then hardcasts Morag. He also casts an Aid from the Cowl, a Gruul Signet, a Felwar Stone, a Haunted Crossroads, and an Ophiomancer. Matthew then sneaks out a Genesis. Matthew then moves to his main phase and activates Hua Tao to put a Doomed Necromancer on top of his library, and then sacrifices his creatures and puts Genesis to the graveyard. Brandon phases in, and Matthew makes a Snake and a Best token on his upkeep, and Brandon then draws. Sander draws as well, and Brandon makes a treasure token. He casts a Soul Ring, and then casts Divine Visitation, and plays a Tainted Field for his land drop, which pumps his team thanks to Feldar Retreat. He then taps out to play Stormherd, and gets 30 4/4 Angels. Moving to combat, Brandon puts a +1/+1 counter onto all of his creatures with a Sandrix trigger, and gives me an Inkling token. He then swings his own Inkling and Shadrix at Matthew. And as it dies, it triggers his Grave Pact, which has Brandon sacrificing the Inkling, and with combat done, passes to Sander. Sander pays for the Pact trigger and draws, with Brandon drawing. Sander then plays a Sapphire Medallion, and then casts Sphinx Mindbreaker, milling us all for 10. Sander follows up with a Replication Technique, and chooses to demonstrate, picking me. Unfortunately, I can only pick a land, and I make another island, while Sander makes 2 more Sphinxes, milling us for 20 more, which mills the rest of Brandon's library. After that, Sander passes to me. I draw, and decline to pay for the Tithe. I then cast a Glowstone Recluse, and mutate a Lord Drakis onto it, grabbing Beast Within from my graveyard. I uptick Domri, and then mutate a Porcuparrot onto the Recluse, and pass turn. Matthew makes a Pest token, and then an Eldrazi spawn, and then reorders his top 3 before drawing for turn. He clamps a Pest to draw 2, triggering Grave Pact, and gaining a life. He repeats the process with smaller tokens to draw a total of 8 cards, and forces to sacrifice 3 more creatures. Matthew then sneaks in Chainer, and discards a Forest to cast Beledros from his graveyard. He follows up with floating a green, and then activating Beledros to untap his lands again. He casts Jury, Master of the Review, and then Matthew evokes a Shriekmaw to kill one of the Sphinxes, and makes Sander sacrifice the other one thanks to Grave Pact as it gets evoked. Brandon responds, however, by casting a Cauldron Haze to give the real Sphinx Persist, bringing it back and milling us all for 10. This mills out Matthew's library as well, and Matthew then casts Finale of Devastation where X is 10. This grabs him a Fleshbag Marauder, which comes in, and he sacrifices Jury to deal 3 to Sander. At this point we make a bit of a mistake, since the Fleshbag should enter with +10/+10. This would have drawn him a card from the Fleshbag entering the battlefield with Garruk's Uprising, which would have lost him the game, but had we realized this, he probably wouldn't have brought a creature back, and instead just pumped the board. Moving to combat, I cast Naya Charm to tap down his board at least, before combat. And moving to his second main phase, he plays a Tainted Peak to untap his board, and goes to a second combat. At this point, he realizes he can't swing through Sander's propaganda, and opts to kill me instead before passing turn. Brandon unfortunately can't draw, and loses the game, and passes to Sander. Sander draws, and seeing only 1 out, passes through his phases. At the end of turn, Matthew activates his Haunted Crossroads to put a creature card from his graveyard on top of his library to try and save himself, but in response, Sander is able to activate the Scavenger Grounds, exiling the graveyard, and thus preventing Matthew from drawing for his next turn, and wins the game. Game review time. So that was a lot of fun, and I'm hoping to do more themed games soon enough. We could have probably gone a little bit harder on the theme and played only dragons, but that might have resulted in a slower game, and this one already took 2 hours and 25 minutes to complete, despite being only about 12 or 13 turns. I really wanted Brandon to draw out in Orzhov because I thought it was going to be really funny. Because with him on the board with Martyr's Bond and that Grave Pact, I really wasn't able to establish a board state, and let's face it, a mutate deck needs at least one creature. That being said, it was pretty cool to see a Shadrix deck, and I like the versatility its combat step effect has, allowing him to basically help people draw cards or build board states, while at the same time helping himself. Matthew unfortunately got the short end of the stick this game, since Evictus is kind of a scary dragon. No one ever really wants to have to gamble with their best permanents on the board, and having to flip into a card you can't even use after losing a valuable creature never feels great. Sanders' choice of Kyrie the Swirling Sky was one that kind of surprised me, but now that I've seen it in action, it's pretty strong. Being able to return 2 valuable instant or sorcery cards from his graveyard to his hand whenever his commander died certainly helped him, and the amount of times that he cast that Seagate's Restoration was just mind-numbing. He must have drawn upwards of like 16 to 20 cards from just that spell, and it was great to see. This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, Cool Stuff Inc., Multizone, Original Magic Art, and Alter Sleeves. But it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.